Hey friends, the views of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Let's Talk Menopause. Let's Talk Menopause does not provide medical advice. The content in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions that you may have. This episode of Hello Menopause is sponsored by Versally. Visit Versally.com for the info and products you need and the menopause care you've been searching for.
I would say it went online at like 7:30 in the morning. And by 9 o'clock, I think I had 5 different friends tell me that their group texts were exploding about it and they were going cuckoo pants over it. All I can tell you is that about 2 weeks into my reporting, I emailed my editor, Elena Silverman, and said, I think this is going to be the most important article I've ever reported. I think there are very few times that you stumble on something that is so poorly understood and affects literally half the population.
Welcome to Hello Menopause. I'm your host, Stacey London. Hello Menopause is changing the conversation around menopause. In every episode, we explore the physical, emotional, and mental changes that women experience during this transformative stage of life. On this episode, journalist Susan Dominus joins us to talk about the powerful piece she wrote on menopause for the New York Times and what she learned throughout her research. Please welcome Susan Dominus to Hello Menopause. So, Susan, I think you potentially wrote the most famous piece about menopause that has happened in the last decade. I would say that even, how many years ago now since that article was published?
Almost 3, maybe more than 3, around 3.
Almost 3. And here we are in a podcast today discussing the importance and the relevance and your work on it. Really says something to me. I mean, there are not that many articles I can remember from 3 years ago that I read in the Times, not for nothing. But I think that, you did something really, really important with this article that is worth discussing at any phase of life. But honestly, to open this discussion about menopause, to open my phone to get there, was that we weren't just talking about symptoms, right? That was the big thing for me, is that you were talking about more how knowledge travels. You were talking about how medicine makes decisions under uncertainty and why so many high-functioning, multitasking women suddenly feel like they're falling apart. And why, it's sort of undeserved that they feel this way. Let's talk about what not just women feel, but the way that the system responds to the way women feel was also kind of this bigger thing for me in the article. I think earlier in the piece, you talk about the fact that there are painfully familiar moments to a lot of people who read it or listened to it. And, you bring up symptoms. Your doctor says they'll prescribe hormones for significant symptoms only. And then there's this internal math about am I being too melodramatic about this?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what did you learn about how to define significant and how much of that is medical judgment versus cultural bias, let's say?
I think there was a lot of cultural bias. And I think there is this assumption that women are, they're both expected to just put up with a lot. And that also the second they complain about anything, they are judged for it and a problem and high strung. And there's recently, just in the past week or so, somebody sent me an article that found that women actually experience pain more acutely than men, like that there are more, neurons firing, that their experience of pain really is different. So if they are complaining more, maybe there's a reason for that. But I think that question of significant symptoms is really interesting because some doctors sort of want that to mean like you can't go on,
Right.
And then other doctors I interviewed, because there was a world of doctors who wanted women to consider menopausal hormone therapy, but the women in general had been scared off of it, and so they couldn't get through. But so some of those doctors who were pro-menopausal hormone therapy would say to me things like, the fact that you're here complaining to me about it tells me it's significant, that it was worth your bringing it up. That's really kind of all I need to know, so long as you know that this might not be entirely a risk-free proposition. I'm going to let you make that decision about whether or not to consider this.
Yeah. And I think that's actually very interesting because there is such a range, right? I mean, when we talk about significant, there is this kind of bias about what we mean by significant to ourselves? How would we know when we have so little understanding of menopause, especially when you were doing this article, that it was almost as if you didn't know what to ask and they didn't know, and doctors didn't know what to say. Right.
Yeah. And there's also, there's also this distinction between aging and aging symptoms, symptoms of aging that are to be expected. Please don't complain to me about the fact that you are, 10 pounds heavier than you were 20 years ago. You're not 30 anymore.
Right.
But also, what are the things, they may be things that happen with aging, but if we could try treating them with hormone therapy and that might work, then maybe it's worth at least a try. So I think it's not helpful when doctors dismiss menopausal symptoms as simply aging, because although it's true there's a lot of overlap there, one can be easily treated, and for right now the other one can't be. So let's do it more.
Right. Why wouldn't we try something just to see if it works? Right. And I guess, sorry, I didn't mean to step on you. Go ahead.
No, one of the wisest things that somebody said to me was, if you have recently gone through menopause or know you're in menopause or know you are in menopause and you're having really uncomfortable symptoms that have only recently onset, try using menopausal hormone therapy, because if the thing goes away, the ringing in your ears, the dry mouth, the dry eyes, the joint pain, if it goes away, then you have a pretty good idea that probably it is hormone related. And if not, then you go off of it, if you want to.
Right. I mean, one of the most interesting things, I guess, in all of the interviews that I did was when Dr. Jen Gunter said to me, we don't need to do all these panels of blood work. If you are in the range for perimenopause, we treat the symptoms. We don't need the blood test to tell us that you don't have any estrogen or that you have unstable estrogen or, whatever it looks like, because we already know these symptoms are specific to this time of life. If you've had them before, you've probably been to a doctor to see them. And if you're having them after menopause, you're probably going to a doctor because they're different causes. But we are aware that, 40 to 60, these things are happening and we can start by treating them right away. I think, one of the things is, did you interview any clinicians who had a framework for that discussion? Or was it more like you felt like as a patient, there was language that you wished you'd had in order to get a better understanding from your clinician?
I mean, I think in general, doctors were trained to say, are you having severe hot flashes that interrupt your sleep and that you consider very bothersome? And if the answer was why, yes, that's exactly what I have, then I think doctors were trained to say, well, you might want to consider menopausal hormone therapy, although, it raises your risk of breast cancer. People who are really trained in menopausal care, and there were very few of them in the past, I think would ask a broader range of questions and have folded into the conversation a way of talking about risk, right? So the biggest problem with research that was conducted heretofore, the famous WHI study, was that although
I was just going to ask about that next, but yes, go ahead.
I mean, it did find, it's, to this day, it is the best randomized control trial we have that measures the effects of menopausal hormone therapy. And that study did find that it does, that being on menopausal hormone therapies after 5 years, it does seem to cause an uptick in breast cancer, let's say. But having women understand the odds of their getting breast cancer as a result of going on this hormone therapy is a kind of complicated conversation about how to think about risk. And I think that some of the doctors would say things like, well, picture a stadium of 10,000 people in it. One of those people in that stadium is going to have breast cancer that they would not ordinarily have had because all 10,000 of them were on estrogen and progesterone. If you can live with those odds and you're really uncomfortable, I would say try this, or try it for 4 years and go off before you reach the 5-year mark. But that's a pretty sophisticated conversation to have with people. And I think doctors, through no fault of their own, are trying to get in and out of a patient of an appointment with as quickly as possible. So to help someone stop and think, how do you evaluate, what's your relationship to risk, and what's your mother's breast cancer history, and what's your, do you smoke, do you drink? Well, that also causes it up. So it's these are really complicated conversations, but I think women are finding space, and doctors are finding ways to have more and more of it.
Absolutely. I mean, your article was really, I think, a huge driver in that direction. One of the things that I think is so interesting, though, about the WHI study is for me, it's also about understanding the data, how to read that data, right?
Yeah.
The fact that we know that these women were older that, they were postmenopausal women as opposed to perimenopausal women, or who had just lost their periods, that, they've just reached menopause, really makes for a different kind of conversation, right? You're starting, and really was more about cardiovascular health, if I understand correctly, rather than that they just noticed the uptick in breast cancer, which was, not as significant as you would have thought had you read this study and thought that we were talking about perimenopausal women as opposed to women in their 60s, and about cardiovascular health. Now, I agree with you. I think there's nothing better that we have right now. Hopefully there's testing in the works that can change that. But even relative to risk, we went through this thing where it was like, first you could have hormones, and then all of a sudden, what was it? Clinicians were saying that they didn't even talk about it, right? Because there was no safe option.
It was considered unsafe. Yeah. I mean, I think what happened there is a really interesting psychological story, actually.
Yes.
Prior to the WHI, doctors really expected estrogen to turn out to be some kind of magical panacea. I mean, one doctor told me that she had a slide in a presentation she used to do, which said that estrogen should be in the drinking water. And so people have been really pushing it on people. And by the way, the reason for this is that, of course, that men have much higher rates of cardiovascular disease than women do if you're comparing the same ages, until women hit menopause. And so there was this assumption that estrogen was protective. And by the way, one of the things that we do know is that for women who are on both estrogen and progesterone, which you have to be on progesterone if you have a uterus, because it counter affects the risk. It's a little bit complicated.
Of estrogen-supported cancers like uterine cancer, right?
Thank you. Yes, exactly. So what is always forgotten is that women who did not have uteruses and who did therefore not have to take progesterone, their breast cancer risks went down. So there are many doctors who just think from inference that actually it's the progesterone that was increasing the risk of breast cancer and not the estrogen. But getting back to the psychological story of the WHI, there were doctors who were pushing this on women. I mean, really so many women were on menopausal hormone therapy. And then when there did appear to be some elevated risks, doctors were aghast because they had basically been caught off guard. And I think there was a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. It was like one of those great stories about you don't know what you don't know. It was also a case of observational research, not having, because there have been tons of observational research, the famous Harvard nurses study that did seem to reflect how good these hormones are for your health. And then when the WHI, a randomized control trial, found different results, I just think it was a crisis in confidence, and started famously, flushing their menopausal hormone therapy down the toilet,
Which is, I mean, and also kind of interesting because I kept asking, I met with a doctor the other day, and we were talking about the fact that the hormones that are available to us today are not exactly the same hormones, that they're not primary, right? And so we're also talking about a completely new class of hormones and their delivery systems. And now we're talking about women and testosterone, things that, it does make me laugh when you say you don't know what you don't know. You also, once you do, you change for the better, right?
Yes.
It just feels that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because there are so many doctors, including Sharon Malone, who basically say it's proven, but with this new formulations, it does not increase the risk of cancer. But the truth is that I'm a stickler, just because I feel like so much of the history of science is about the failures of observational studies. And
the minutia.
Yeah, and you think you're controlling for everything in your observational study, but it's very hard. And I don't know if your listeners will know the distinction or whether we should take a minute to explain it. But in an observational study, basically, people ask people after 20 years, hey, were you taking hormones all these years or not? And people answer yes or no. And then they look at how healthy they are. And they try to say, well, the people who are on hormones are healthier and the people who aren't are less healthy. And it's hard to tease out causation from correlation. So there's all sorts of statistical methods that, people use to control for income, for other healthy habits, that kinds of thing. But it's really hard to control for everything. And you don't know. So I'm a little bit I'm pretty dubious in general about observational studies.
All right. But we only have, we were talking about that we only have the WHI, and hopefully there are new things coming. But
I don't think there are.
Yes, I think there are too. I mean, now.
No, I don't think there are. You think
Oh,
there are?
you don't think there are?
I'm not
Oh,
aware of long-term randomized controlled, like 10-year long, because in order to see what kind of outcome, this is the problem with studying menopausal hormone therapy, is women in
yes.
their 50s, knock on wood, they don't tend to get sick, right? I mean, thank God. So in order to have statistical reflections of how hormones affect your health, you have to either start a study with women in their 50s and play it out until they're in their 70s, which is when people do get sick, or you have to start when they're older, which is what the WHI did. That's why they started with older women. So
I
anyway,
did not
I just
realize
am
that.
not, yeah, so I'm not even aware if there is, I mean, the WHI was one of the most ambitious undertakings in American medical research. So I
Right.
don't even know, and because it was studying things other than just women's health, by the way, it was studying low fat versus high fat and vitamins, that kind of thing. It's trying to make up for a lot of lost time. But I'm not aware of any longitudinal randomized control trials that are being conducted right now on menopausal hormone therapy.
Well,
I would be thrilled if I were wrong, but I'm not aware of any.
I'm not, well, I mean, I just assumed that because we have had again, not to say garbage information, but information from the WHI study that really sent women's health, right, and longevity understanding off track, that I would have thought that by now, at least we would be trying to understand which, because now testosterone has entered the chat. So we're just making these assumptions, or we are going to have to do like a long-term study. And I would have assumed that since it's become sort of the flavor of the month, new business vertical, right? You have grifters, but you also have scientists. And I would think that that was also why, one of the reasons Sharon Malone was such an incredible fighter for getting the black box off of vaginal estrogen, non-systemic estrogen, that there are people fighting the fight, whether doctors or educators, who are trying to figure out those long-term benefits. I would be shocked after all this conversation, the rise of telehealth and the rise of prescribing hormones, that we're not getting anybody paying attention to the progress or safety or anything, really?
Well, I mean, it depends what we're talking about.
Right.
And we can talk about testosterone in a minute too, because I just wrote an article about that.
Oh,
But
great. Yes.
I'm pretty familiar with the research that's been done on that as well.
Uh-huh.
And I think basically the feeling is that menopausal hormone therapy is safe enough that they, don't necessarily need to do more follow-up, because even though it was, in other words, we see the data and we're like, the worst case scenario is it's the data is what the WHI found. It's probably a little safer, we're going to assume it's safer because the formulations are safer. But even if the worst case scenario is what the WHI found, it's safe enough that doctors can safely prescribe it to women, and they can sort of know their risks and their benefits and make those calculations for themselves. But it's not an irresponsible choice to offer it to women. Whereas, by the way, asking women to be randomized to forego hormonal therapy, which is what a really randomized controlled trial would entail. You could argue that that's unethical. I mean, to ask women to submit themselves to rolling the dice about whether they're going to be somebody who suffers gravely from menopausal symptoms, no, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you. I mean, that makes sense to me. I guess it's just that because there is a lot of, I mean, your clarity is kind of amazing to me, right? You're like, I'm dubious about everything until proven otherwise. But I feel like now there's this conflation in this menopause space, right? Whether or not you're additive or extractive capital, I'm not, I won't get into that right now, right? Whether you're a company that is or isn't. But because there are the rise of telehealth, because there is a huge preponderance in the prescription of hormones again, I would think that, because of these kind of smaller risks or things that we know could happen, worst case scenario, breast cancer, that we would be trying to somehow either perfect or optimize those hormones to work as best as possible, right? I've also heard of people who are trying to find ways so that the ovaries don't die ever, that we never go through menopause.
Oh, well, that's definitely happening. That kind of research is definitely happening and is super fascinating. And I think there's all kinds of other technology. I mean, we do know now that the uterus is that the ovaries, rather, is it the uterus or the ovaries? One of them is the fastest aging organ in the human body, actually, which is really interesting. I think it must be the ovaries, as a matter of fact. So that's becoming a way of even studying what aging is. But I think that you may be right. I wonder if people are studying, like, are there even lower doses that women can be on that would offset some of the symptoms? I wonder if people are studying that. It would be a great thing to study. I don't know. And I think, the really interesting thing will be in 10 years, if my article and this big, which was part of a larger movement towards, I think, helping women understand that there is treatment for these symptoms. I think, as I said, it was just one part of it. Oprah was starting to talk about it. Michelle Obama was starting to talk about it. There were TikTok
I think
videos.
you talked about it first. Not first, but first of those people.
I'm sure. But I guess what I was going to say is, that's funny. Well, what I was going to say is that, I think some people think, look, in 10 years, epidemiologically, there may indeed be a small uptick in breast cancer in women in this country. Like, we don't really know, but across the population, like, you would kind of expect to see it. And I think people would still say, overall, it might be worth it because so many fewer women are suffering on a day-to-day basis. They're having fewer hip fractures. They're not ending up in nursing homes. They're having better sex lives. I mean, there's so many things that come with feeling generally okay day to day. And by the way, when the WHI was studied, we didn't know if you got a breast cancer diagnosis, how that was going to look for you. Nobody wants breast cancer, God forbid, but 90% of breast cancers are treatable. So I think that the whole calculation is just very different right now.
Well, it's so interesting that you said that, because I wanted to go back to what you had been saying about, our relationship to risk. How can we even understand our relationship to risk if we're not given risk and benefits, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Very percent. Yes.
So I'm like, I don't know how to make that choice between perhaps a chance of breast cancer, but knowing that 90% of breast cancers are treatable, this changes, the fact that my day-to-day life could be so affected. Me personally, my perimenopausal experience, I had suicidal ideology,
so sorry.
Not ideology, but you know what I'm saying, iteration.
Suicidal ideation. Those are words that trip off the tongue after the pandemic. We all know those words now.
And after many interviews, I find that I do stop speaking all that well, so I apologize. But no, I make a joke of it now, but I used to say that I wouldn't walk across the Brooklyn Bridge because I was afraid I would throw myself off of it.
I'm so sorry.
That moment, or during that time, which went on for way too long until I knew what was going on. If you had said to me, do you want this or do you want breast cancer? I would have said, like, this mental torture is like, I need relief from this. I would much prefer to take the risk, knowing what the risks and the benefits are going to be. And I think that, unfortunately, this is the biggest problem in women's health generally, is that we don't have a full picture. Right. We're not real men. There's not enough that's been studied about us for us to say, and in any given iteration of recommendation, whether it's a prescription or lifestyle change, unless we're given risks and benefits, how would we make those choices for ourselves?
Yeah. And sometimes people can't really make the risk benefit analysis unless they personally have tried it. In other words, you have, let's say you are in the awful position of having a family history of breast cancer, but you are also somebody who is thinking that you might have to quit your job because your brain fog and depression is so intense that you can't fulfill your fiduciary duty as a lawyer to your clients, which is what one friend expressed to me. This was her particular dilemma. I have a history of breast cancer in my family. It's what my mother died of, but I am a lawyer and I do think I might have to quit working. Yeah. And I think the answer for her was, well, if you go on hormones and it only makes you feel a little better, then that benefit might not be worth it. But if it is game changing, then maybe it is worth it for you. And for her, at least, and this is just one person, once she experienced the benefit of the hormones, it was so clear to her that the risk was worth it for those benefits.
Yes.
As cancer treatment has progressed, she wasn't guaranteed she was going to get it anyway. Hopefully she won't. The formulations might indeed be safer, and she could live her life day to day and be a thriving, healthy human being. So,
right. And, it really makes me laugh that you say that, because I talk about this all the time. Years ago, there was a Scientific American study, about happiness, particularly in women, saying the lowest point of happiness in that sort of U graph is 40 to 50. And that is the highest rate of decreased earning potential, highest rate of divorce, highest rate of depression. And I'm like, but all of those things could be correlated or caused by menopause, if you think about it.
Yes, I'm well aware of that finding that you.
Yeah.
And I also never made that connection, but I think you're absolutely right. I think it's also true for men is the reason. It might be a little bit confusing, but I think for women, certainly that has to be a contributing factor. I never thought about
I mean,
that.
it's like perimenopause written all over it, right?
Yes,
And
you're
I
so
laugh
right.
because
Yeah.
we don't know the risk versus benefit of saying, I would prefer that treatment rather than break up with my partner just because like my sex drive disappeared and now they think I don't love them, right? Like that.
Yes,
These are all
yes.
things that I immediately understood to be the underlying cause. Of course, there's a decrease in earning potential, aside from the fact that, you know, aging women are not particularly adored by society, right?
Yeah.
It's this idea that like she's forgetting things, she's kooky, she's too emotional, whatever it is, really
She
does.
has no F's to give. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, those are the. I'm also convinced. I think we're one of 3 species in the world that go through menopause, and I'm like convinced that the reason I'm not sure about killer whales or, you know, bonobos or whoever the other ones are, but I'm pretty sure that women go through menopause so that they can rule the world. I'm convinced that it's not. I'm not big on the grandmother theory per se, solely because I just don't think, even though we have uteruses, that's our sole purpose in life is to have children. And it's certainly not our sole purpose in life to take care of our children's children. I do think that this idea of being out of fucks to give and also getting to a place where you have a different kind of clarity is a different space in time for your life to be different things. We've been told as women, you know, here's your path. This is what society expects of you, whether it's children or marriage or career or all 3. And then this is when we actually get to take back and decide who the hell we want to be instead. I keep thinking of this.
Finish your sentence. I'm so curious.
I keep thinking of this as like, it's the revelation that when women actually say it does, you know, I have a friend who says it gets greater later, right? Or, you know, we get better with age. That really what they're talking about is this sense of freedom becomes a vantage point from which we can actually help other people.
I mean, if you think about it in evolutionary terms, also, it's like, you know, when you're in those reproductive years, you are valued, right? You have value. Men literally, or, you know, let's just say in a classic sexual dynamic, you are valued, you are sought, you are cherished, you have, you're desirable. Why? Because of the same reason that you can actually create, you know, offspring for men, let's say. And then the truth is that, you know, after menopause, you are no longer fertile, which is to say that coincides with men feeling, not cogitating, but sort of no longer finding you desirable. And you do sort of have to look out for yourself. You are now, you know, now you are your own protector, right? And so potentially, and you're not sort of cherished potentially in the same way. Or there's a lower chance of that. And so you have to be a little bit tougher and a little bit stronger and a little bit more fearless, maybe.
And I do think that makes sense to me with the way hormones kind of, you know, are agitated and then kind of decrease. That kind of I don't give a fuck also comes from having less estrogen, right? So I do feel like there is.
I mean, if we're going to really generalize, I mean, there's a lot of analyzing what hormones do to men to make women like women and make like men like men. It's actually quite complicated.
Of course.
But to the extent that we can sort of, you know, feel that women who are high in estrogen might also, or let's say, you know, I'm trying to think about this for a second. But yeah, is that estrogen part of what makes women more empathetic, caring, and verbal? Maybe, right? So you have less of that. Maybe.
Right. And like, does testosterone make us more, you know, aggressive or able to stand up for ourselves or have more energy after these, what I consider to be, and again, this is me talking from my personal experience, but I really felt like I was such a people pleaser before that I was, especially a medical people pleaser. So this whole idea of am I being dramatic if I'm saying like my life is falling apart, my doctor's like, it's probably menopause. You know, I felt guilty for feeling like this can't just be menopause. I don't even know what that means. I feel awful. And this sense of
amazing.
it was really amazing that am I making too much of this? Also, to recognize at a certain point, once I had so much knowledge around this topic, or more knowledge than I'd ever been afforded before, I was also able to say, like, I'm not being melodramatic, and I have to find a doctor who understands exactly what I'm saying and feel like I'm heard and seen and valued, not for being loved, but for being, heard, so that I get the care and help that I need. And I think so many of us went into our doctor's offices like not even knowing how to describe what was happening. I mean, for me, it was so intense. And again, this idea of not having a format or a structure with which to talk to my physician, and my physician not being able to tell me anything but like, we don't have any good answers.
Yep. Yeah. We don't have any good answers. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's awful. It's so interesting. I always forget this, but there were a lot of mental health problems in my extended family that I heard about, from like my grandparents' era. And the one thing I always knew about my father's mother was that she had gone into the hospital with severe, almost in a catatonic state, and had electroshock therapy. And whenever I said something like, "But why did that happen?" they always said, "Oh, it was menopause," which is sort of amazing to me now. Because some women do have severe psychosis, even as a result of menopause.
Yes.
But what's funny about it is that I always was like, is that just their way of saying like she got old and crazy? Like I didn't actually think that was accurate, but now it's obviously quite possible that was accurate, and that maybe it was better respected for its power back then than it even was in the 70s and 80s.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, I also think, I wonder, I know this is maybe a bridge too far. And again, I'm just theorizing, but I do wonder if the advent of the pill and being able to have, more free love kind of pushed menopause out of the way of the conversation, like when it came to women's health, that we had bigger fish to fry, that, like where we were really in the 70s and 80s was much more about the, female empowerment and being able to have it all. And, I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never let you forget you're the man Angelique commercial, like that we were so busy talking about our capabilities that we didn't really talk about what physically, biologically is happening as we age, or things to look out for. The idea that I didn't know that menopause could happen, or perimenopause happened in your, let's say, mid to late 40s, was because I always thought that, menopause was what happened to Edith Bunker. And when I was a little kid, I thought she was in her 70s. Like it didn't even occur to me.
Point. She did. Yes, that's a famous episode. And she did seem like she was in her 70s. And
it was the way.
Yes.
Right?
And she was a wonderful actor. And by the way, women did run around in like house coats and had it was a different era, and women, I think, did age in a different way back then.
Yeah.
That episode I find fascinating because it's actually pretty sympathetic to her. And it's also sympathetic.
It's very sympathetic. And that's what I just remember. Like, I couldn't believe that Edith screamed at Archie, because I just never seen her do it. Right. Like, he's the mean one and she's the sweet one. And all of a sudden, hell hath no fury like a woman in menopause. But it was incredibly sympathetic in that Gloria, the Sally Struthers character, says you just go to the doctor and you get your hormones. And I remember thinking, what? It's too little to really understand.
Those were the days. Yeah.
We didn't have that when I was growing up. No, you never saw anything about menopause. I think now
hormones, much as anybody saying, go get hormones. I mean, until between 2002 and 2023, it was 21 years of our, it's funny, we're talking about birth control, something I never thought about either, which is that actually, I wonder if a smaller percentage of women experienced hideous perimenopausal symptoms
because of the pill.
Yeah, because women are often on the pill up until they're like 50. And so there were fewer years when women would be, because of course there's estrogen, in the pill. By the way, there's a lot more estrogen obviously in the pill than there is in menopausal hormone therapy. Yes. So it's possible that like a smaller percentage of women were going through hell during perimenopause than was true in like the 50s, pre-birth control, being ubiquitous. Never
But
thought about that.
that's such a
Yeah, up until like age 50 even, or age 50. Some women, I mean, I know women who stayed on the pill till they were, 50, 51, 52. So that your perimenopause. Wait, if you think you are having, this is something I do have to say to women that they don't like to
yes.
hear. But if you think you're having perimenopausal symptoms and you are on the pill, I don't think it's likely that they are perimenopausal symptoms because there is a lot of estrogen in the pill. And I've never asked somebody who is actually a doctor if that's true,
Okay, that needs to be your next article.
or at least I think we should just get a yes or a no. But
No.
because then it's like, sorry, sweetie, that is normal aging because you have
Right. You're like, oh, there goes the article. Right.
But on the other hand, maybe the fact that you're going through these natural ups and downs, the pill masks it to some degree, but not entirely. I don't know. I am going to ask someone.
I'm really curious. And then I'm so curious about your curiosity about all of this. I mean, when you wrote this article, did you know the kind of effect it was going to have? I mean, could you feel it when you were writing it? Or were you just shocked by the actual, like, I mean, it was so big.
Okay. I was definitely shocked by, I would say it went online at like 7:30 in the morning. And by 9:00, I think I had 5 different friends tell me that their group texts were exploding about it and they were going cuckoo pants over it.
I mean, it's on Instagram by 9 a.m. We were all quoting it, posting it.
Well, I think what all I can tell you is that about 2 weeks into my reporting, I emailed my editor, Elena Silverman, and said, I think this is going to be the most important article I've ever reported. And
wow.
I think there are very few times that you stumble on something that is so poorly understood and affects literally half the population. I mean, just when does that happen? And so,
and arguably the whole population.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Right? I mean, it's like the primary people who are affected and everybody in our networks who doesn't know what to do with the big feelings we're all of a sudden experiencing, or that we don't want to have sex, or, that we don't want to brush our hair, or whatever it is. I feel like what that article did for menopause is like almost as important as what the WHI study did, right? I mean, we finally had an article that was so fairly presented and so incredibly well researched and understood. One, I was very sad. I can't lie to you that I wasn't in the article.
Oh, I'm sorry, Stacy. I don't know how I missed it. You were
but I was like, everyone I know, every ally I have.
I'm so sorry. I apologize.
I was like, I don't know any.
But actually, you will, if you go through it, you'll see it's almost exclusively medical doctors.
I'm teasing you, but I really am. I really was like amazed by the article and the fact that the timing of it. It was really feeling like being on the crest of a wave. I really hear you when you say like this is the most important article I might write, because of that impact still matters to people. It is still the article that I say, read this before you do anything.
You do? Oh, that's so meaningful to me. Thank you, Stacy. Oh.
But it's really true. I mean, there are I would think that there, just what you said, there are so few opportunities to write on something, not even that isn't understood well, forget about that part, just that has an impact on so many people, written in a way that they can understand it, that they recognize that they have not been seen or heard in the way that they have been dealing with their doctors, and not really understood what their options are. I think one of the biggest things that we talk about on this podcast a lot in terms of action items, what can you do, is like you have agency. You can leave a doctor, you can ask these questions, you can ask for the help that you need, you can schedule a separate appointment just to talk about menopause instead of trying to shove it in at the end of your physical, and very like specific things that we can help people do in order to have a better menopause experience all the way around, whether that's like talking to your friends, your family, your doctors, whatever that looks like, the workplace, whatever that looks like.
I should have told about how little I knew going into this article.
Please. Yes.
I got a nice education at a fancy college. I like to think I'm no dummy. And I went for a walk at the beginning. I'd just been given the assignment, and I told a friend of mine, a colleague at the New York Times, very esteemed person. And I told her what I was working on, and she said, I have a question for you. If you are, about to go through menopause and then you go on menopausal hormone therapy, does it delay menopause? Like, does your body actually not change the way that it would be changing? And I remember saying to her, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. The answer is no. Your body goes through menopause and then you treat the symptoms of the fact that you have gone through. But I couldn't even answer that question. And we were both, like, as I said, people who consider ourselves fairly well resourced and well educated, and I've covered women's health on and off for like a bazillion years. And I think part of the problem is that so many women got their information about women's health for years from women's magazines. But women's magazine advertisers hate menopause. They hated any reference. They always wanted their readers to skew younger rather than older, just because of the way that, like, literally buying patterns get set in earlier. So they're always trying to appeal to younger women. And so I just think that there was this huge vacuum for so long.
And isn't that so amazing? Because now, I mean, look, magazines are essentially dead, but they're still doing, any magazine that's around has a zillion drug ads in it now anyway.
Yeah.
Because those are the only ad-supported dollars around. You're not going to find them in fashion as much as you did.
And magazine readers, because magazines are an old-fashioned thing, magazine readers tend to skew old. But I do think that now menopause what blows my mind is that women have found a way to make an issue that has to do with their own aging somehow hot. And I just think that is like the great miracle of the 21st century. Like, it's never happened before, vaginal dryness, hot, hot, hot. Like, that is, we can't get enough of that, and even just, you could say the words vaginal and dryness together out loud in a sentence. I would have died 5 years ago rather than said,
I mean, I always used to say, when I started State of Menopause, I was like, the only thing you want dry in menopause is a good martini, because I was like, we have to combat this with some kind of humor.
Yes.
Mostly because we've been made to feel so ashamed of aging. And that's what I think women associate with menopause. Not that it is this, almost rite of passage, biological rite of passage. It's that you're old. You're old and you're worthless in our culture.
You're old, you're worthless, and you're sexually revolting. I think there's a lot of humor around. There's some Adam Sandler movie that I remember watching even before I was menopausal, in which the whole joke is that one of the men in the cohort, and these men are in their 40s, has a girlfriend who's like 60 or 65. And like, the shot of this young man kissing this older woman was a sight gag that would leave them wet. And to me, that movie, made by a very mainstream movie star, really speaks to just how permissible it was to revile older women who tried to be sexual. That's what that really says to me.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I do feel, because, I have a very good friend I went to school with, and she was the one who said this to me first, but we were talking about the fact that, this whole idea of that we have an expiration date is a joke. It's the values of our youth have an expiration date. And that when those values are done, they are what expire, not us. We just no longer choose to, subscribe to that belief system. Right. We're no longer saying, like, my value is how many kids I have. My value is how much money I make, or the corner office, or
my value is how much men want to have sex with me. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm convinced this is why a lot of women wind up dating other women after menopause. I'm like convinced, because women are just much cooler. And that's my theory.
They therefore don't feel like, of course, women are cooler all along, but they no longer feel obligated to subscribe to the conventions of society.
Yes, they don't feel it. I also think that, like, women just generally have such a better understanding of each other in such a more intimate way, even in friendship, that it makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, no, I think that's interesting.
That's me personally.
Yeah, no. Are you seeing a woman right now?
Not anymore, but yes, no, I was for 6 years.
Wow, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
It does make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Well, it was funny. One coach said to me that a lot of women that she's seen, like I remember finding out that Meredith Baxter Burney was dating a woman, and that Maria Bello was dating a woman, and like all these kind of beautiful middle-aged women had started dating women. And that wasn't my inspiration. I just remember thinking about it after talking to a coach who'd said to me that post-menopause, the way that your hormone profile is different than you were. So you do have, like almost a different kind of psychological profile as well.
That
And
makes
it
a lot of
makes,
sense.
right? I just thought it was so interesting. She was like, there is something to this idea that the way that we have gendered feminine and masculine gets very blurred after postmenopause, post-andropause, right? Because there are ways in which we kind of even out that as women, we're kind of constantly, our hormones are up, they're down, we're pregnant, we're postpartum, we're this, we're that. So that it always seems like we're not very even keel, rational, or like detached. And that going through menopause kind of gives you that quote unquote, patriarchal, rational, less emotional mindset.
A rational woman would prefer to be with a woman.
Exactly. Not that they necessarily can be, or, like I'm not saying you can just decide, but at the same time, I really did feel that shift after menopause. Like I really kept thinking like, oh yeah, I more than want to pause on men. Like I really just, I'm done.
Well, I think that we are only just starting to understand how much our hormones dictate who we are, right? Like we're walking bags of chemicals. And we know that when you put women on very high doses, sorry, is that me or you?
No, I think that is me. I apologize.
No worries. I think when you put women, we're starting to see that when you put women on very high doses of testosterone, they change. They change dramatically. Who they are inside feels different. And so we don't totally understand the way that menopause and that shift in hormones will change women across the board. But whatever is happening in every person is probably more subtle and has more ramifications than we can easily grasp, measure, discern.
So one of the things that I think is so interesting in literally everything that you've said is it's not black and white. There is so much nuance to this conversation, and our hormonal health is finally getting at least some of the spotlight. Like when we didn't even talk about it before, unless we were talking about like horny teenage boys. So I really do appreciate the fact that these are much more complicated conversations. But at the same time, I do think that this brings up like so many interesting topics, right? Jen Gunter talks about in the Menopause Manifesto that ACEs, that adverse childhood events, can have an effect on menopause. That's what, 40, 50 years later. That, things like that. So there's so much that I feel like we still don't understand. I do hope that you're going to continue writing and maybe a book.
I don't think I'm going to do a book because so many were in the work, just as proof that I was not necessarily at the forefront of all of this, but was early, but not like, there were so many books that were already in the works, including Tamsin Fidel's and
there are 9 books coming out this year alone.
Yeah, and Jen Gunther's, and which is wonderful and a classic. And I admire her so much. So I'm glad you keep mentioning her. I think that I felt that I wasn't sure what I could contribute, especially since I'm not a doctor, and there were a lot of doctors who were a little, or people like Tamsin who were just earlier than I was. Just speaking candidly, also, this funny thing happens when you write a magazine article, which is you work extremely hard on it. And then if you're somebody with me who has like a little bit of low grade ADHD, you're so excited to move on to the next thing.
Are you a Gemini by any chance?
I'm a Virgo, but I'm always going to be interested in women's health and in this particular topic. Sometimes people will stop me, people I know from town, and they'll be like, look, I'm so sorry to ask you this. And I know you're probably sick of talking about it. And I always say, I will never be sick of talking about it. I am fascinated by every woman's experience. I'm not a doctor, but I'm happy to share whatever I know. And I want to hear your story and tell me, because I still can't believe women went through this for as long as they did without getting better help. And for some reason, the story that really sticks with me is a friend of mine who had been on the pill till she was about 50, 51. And then she went off the pill because her doctor was telling her, look, your risk of stroke is getting too high. Now that you're in your 50s, you don't want to have the added risk of stroke that being on the pill will give you. So she went off the pill, did not go on menopausal hormone therapy. Nobody said to her, like, by the way, you might experience some extreme symptoms now, or be on the lookout. She started having extreme joint pain. And I think she spent 6 months going to immunologists and rheumatologists, and was basically convinced, because the doctors were telling her, that she probably had lupus. And not only was she not getting help she needed for 6 months, but she was under a tremendous amount of stress. And somebody finally said, like, hey, you might want to try menopausal hormone therapy. And it got better right away. And I'm just so mad that those rheumatologists and immunologists, nobody said to her, so by the way, you're what, 52? Just curious, where are you in your menopausal story? In your menopausal
we don't have OBGYNs who know anything about menopause. And now we want like an immunologist and a rheumatologist to know. Like, that's the crazy thing, how connected. That's what I didn't understand. And I think there is a real case for this, even in your article, but this idea of connecting the dots, that it is
huge. Every medical story I've ever done, at some point you're like, oh, I get it. The allergists who treat people with severe allergies are not talking to the psychiatrists and neuroscientists who study anxiety and putting together that there might be something systemic that explains why people who have extreme food allergies also tend to have higher rates of anxiety. And it's not just because they're afraid of eating this, there's something going on systemically. People talk to each other. So, I mean, I just feel like any doctor, all that medical school needs to say on day one is, we're going to teach you a bunch of stuff. It's all going to be really important. But I just want to say, if a woman's between 45 and 55, the first thing you should ask her is if she still gets her period, and start with that. Because everything else is gravy beyond that. But this is not complicated. We don't have to train immunologists. We just have to have a sentence at the top of the syllabus on day one, that says, just ask. Just one question. I don't care. Are you like an orthopedic surgeon that specializes in feet? I can't tell you how many women friends I have who are having foot problems. I don't know that it's menopausally related, but still, just ask.
Yes. We're actually, I think, more physiologically complicated. You'd be better off studying us than studying men. You could treat probably most men's things by studying women as opposed to the other way around.
That's a good point. And the reason why they didn't include women in these studies all those years was because literally they thought hormones were going to make everything irrelevant and confounding and confusing. So it's very much because women's hormones fluctuate the way that they do within a month and then over the course of their lives that they
did not. And my argument is that that's exactly the reason to study them.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a great point.
I really love this conversation. Sorry, I know it got a little bit off track, but it just...
No, I love these kind of freewheeling, creative...
Because I really, really very enthused by this conversation and very excited to talk to you. So I would love to do
work you're doing, educating women about it.
Hello, Menopause is a production from Let's Talk Menopause, produced in partnership with Studio Kairos. I'm your host, Stacey London. Let's Talk Menopause is a national nonprofit organization invested in changing the conversation around menopause so women get the information they need and the healthcare they deserve. Please visit letstalkmenopause.org. Hello, Menopause is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and everywhere you get your podcasts. This episode of Hello Menopause is sponsored by Versally. Visit Versally.com for the info and products you need and the menopause care you've been searching for.